Hey everyone! Today on the plastic canvas we're painting the church giants from Bloodborne by CMON Games. Hey everyone, Matt here from the Plastic Canvas and welcome to the 10th episode in this Bloodborne painting series, and today we are painting the church giants. These are one of the enemy types that you'll face in this adventure and exploration game from CMON Games. So the church giants here are just the perfect example of the type of mini that is, for lack of a better term, my favourite painting experience. And that's where you go in and start painting a mini with a plan. You know what colours you're going to be using in different parts, where you're going to build up texture, those sorts of things. So you go in knowing what level of effort you're going to be putting into painting the mini and the overall quality that you're going to be going for. But then as you start painting it and you see how all of those colours combine and the way that the textures look and those sorts of things, you just naturally want to keep painting it better and better and better and doing things that you didn't initially plan on doing just because of how much you're loving how it looks. And that is exactly what happened here with the church giants. So I went in with a really clear plan of how I wanted them to look in terms of the skin colour, how I was going to build up the highlighting and shading on the cloak through dry brushing with gradually lighter and lighter greys, the way that I was going to highlight the tattered pants. I was just going to throw down a brown leather colour, wash over the top, quick little highlight, that was going to be it. But as I was working through each section and seeing how everything combines, I was just loving more and more and more how it was looking, and so I ended up doing so much more than what I initially planned. So like with their big cloak, after I'd finished doing that highlighting and shading with the dry brushing, I then spent some time to build up like a spattered kind of mud effect down around the base of the robe and the base of their sleeves, just to make it look as though these church giants have been wandering through Yharnam for quite some time, and that they've built up some dirt and dust and debris and things like that. Also with their axe, I always knew that I was going to be doing just like a rough metal kind of finish to it, but what I ended up doing was a really cool rust effect on each of them, and then also some blood spattering on there. But also, after watching a couple of videos, I found a really cool way to do some dripping blood, so it actually looks like that they've just carved someone to pieces, and then hanging off that bottom edge of the axe, some blood is dripping off of it. These were all things that I had no intention of doing at the start. Well, not that I didn't have the intention of doing it, just that it wasn't part of the plan. It was more time and effort than what I initially thought I would go to paint these. But these all just organically came out of how much I was loving how the church giants were looking. And that is just my favourite painting experience to have. And that's happened with plenty of other minis in the past, including other ones from Bloodborne. So here is a photo of the Huntsman's minions. And when I went into painting them, I knew that I was going to be doing each of their cloaks in a different kind of leathery material kind of colour, but I didn't really have any intention of doing the damaged and tarnished look that there is with them. That all happened because I was just really liking how they were coming together and how they were all looking standing next to each other. And then so that was an extra element that I wanted to add, because I really wanted to sell the look that, like the church giants here, they've been wandering through Yharnam, been in a couple of fights and battles and those sorts of things, and that tarnished and all those scratches and scuff marks and things like that that I added on just adds to that look so much more, and out on the board they just look so much better because of it. And so this is just what I love about painting, is when you go in with a plan, you know what level of effort and quality you're going for, but then just because of how much you're loving how it all comes together, that just naturally drives you to do so much more. Yes, it takes more time, but it is all worth it in the end, because what you end up with is just a mini that just looks so much better than what you initially planned, because you've gone through and built up some texture somewhere that you mightn't have, or you've done some rust where you weren't planning on it, or you've built up some of that mud that you weren't initially thinking that you would. And it's just so good to be painting with that drive, just to be wanting to do more. Not just doing it because you think it will look good, but because you just want to do it. And yes, I had so much fun painting these church giants, probably one of my favourite minis to have painted for a while, and so I really, really hope you enjoy watching it as well. Alright, so just to catch you up with what I've done so far, I just started with a black prime. That's so that all of the colours that go over the top will stay nice and dark and have some good depth to them. And then I started with the skin, so I just base coated with one of my mid-range greys, threw a black wash over the top of that, and then just did some simple highlighting. So the first layer of the highlight was just to go back to the base coat grey that I used, then mixed in a little bit of light grey with that, and then the final stage of the highlighting was just the straight light grey, and I kept that to just the tops of the nose and the cheekbones, the top of the left hand that's holding the axe handle there, just those more upper facing portions. And then with the pants there, I just base coated them with ruddy leather, just a nice dark leather colour, threw a black wash over the top so that it just darkened the recesses a little bit. And then I just mixed up a light brown colour just to use as a dry brush, just to catch all of the edges of the tattered parts of the pants. And then now we're putting that same brown wash over the top that I did before. And this is there just to dull down all of that dry brushing that I did, but it does add some texture. So it makes it look as though these tattered pants have not only been torn, but have also got quite a few scuff marks and that sort of stuff all over them, just helping to reflect the fact that these church giants have been wandering through Yharnam for quite a while, and that their pants and other parts of their clothing have taken a bit of damage over time. Now this little detail in here going across their chest, I didn't know what this was supposed to be or what it was supposed to be made of, so I thought, hey, I'll just paint it to be a dark leather colour, and then it probably won't even really be noticed in the end. So whether that's right or not, I have no idea, but there we go. Brown leather. Alright, so now certainly in terms of surface area, I'm getting onto painting the main part of the church giant, and that is their cloak. Now when I first started thinking about how I was going to paint these minis, I did and ah a little bit about how I was going to do the highlighting and shading here, because there is so many folds and recesses in the cloaks. If I was going to build it up by layering, it was going to take a long time to actually shade all of those recesses, and then also highlight all of the upper facing portions of each of the folds as well. So as you can see, I ended up deciding on just dry brushing, because I figured that would be certainly the quickest and easiest way to paint it, but also the thing that I find when painting material by dry brushing is that it just naturally adds this really, really cool kind of textured and rough kind of effect to it, I guess. So it can really help to make material look as though it's not brand new. It is tattered and scuffed and those sorts of things, which ties in perfectly with the theme and the vibe that we're trying to get from these church giants. So I started by mixing in quite a bit of black into stone grey, which is the grey that I wanted to be that mid-tone, I suppose. And then I just dry brushed that straight over the black prime. And I covered, well, all of the cloak, but I did try and leave just the underside of the deepest folds still showing. So the shadows that kind of end up showing through right at the end is still the black prime that I initially started with. And then once I'd done that first layer, I then just mixed in some more stone grey into that mixture, just so that it lightened it off a little bit. And then I went around and did another pass, but I just lightened it off a little bit and just didn't quite cover as much surface area as what I did with the first layer. So if you look at kind of on the middle of his back there, when we get to see the backside, it really kind of sticks out there and then juts back in. So those areas where it's going to be in really, really dark shadow, I just made sure that I didn't quite hit those edges quite as hard, just so that we can start to build up a graduation from the deepest part of the shadows through to what will eventually be the brightest part of the highlights, because it's not just going to be either in super dark shadow or super bright highlight, there's going to be that transition in between. And now that I've done a couple of layers, just gradually mixing in more and more of the stone grey, I'm now up to the point where I'm working with just straight stone grey. And you can really see by this point, I'm only hitting the upper facing portions of each of the main kind of volumes of the cloak. So the tops of the shoulders and the back, the top of the sleeve there. Now you saw I was doing it there just before, but we can't quite see the spot at the moment, but just to the bottom kind of portion of each of the sleeves, for lack of a better term, you'll notice even though it's not an area that would actually be in a bright highlight, kind of like this spot here, I am still adding the lighter tones there, just to really lighten them up, because later on, when I start to use the brown wash to build up a mud effect, I wanted to build it up there as well, and by having that area a bit lighter, it allows that mud effect to show through a little bit more. So that was just something that I was doing, even though that's probably not where a brighter highlight would be. I was using that to set up being able to do the mud effect a little bit later. And now here I'm just starting to mix in lighter greys, and now I'm really just keeping it to the upper facing portions here. So again, the tops of the shoulders, the top of that back section there, the bottom edge of the cloak that's sticking out the most, where it would be getting hit by light, but those parts as it sort of sinks in running up his back, that doesn't get any of this brighter highlight. There you can see I was doing that bottom part of the sleeve there, again just lightening it off, so that then when I use the washes in the next step to build up the mud effect, it's not so dark that the wash can't be seen. It can be seen because it's nice and light. And so I'm just repeating that process, just making it lighter and lighter and lighter. And every time I lighten the color off, I reduce the amount of surface area that I'm covering, but I also reduce the pressure that I'm dry brushing with, just to make sure that, you know, here as I'm using the final layer, the brightest gray, I'm only clipping just the finest point of the edges, just so that you do get that graduation from the brightest part of the highlight through to the darkest part of the shadow. Because yes, dry brushing is a really quick way of building up a highlight, but on this scale, you do still need to have that transition from the highlight through to the shadow. And so just doing it over several layers and gradually getting lighter and lighter, both in terms of color and the pressure, it allows that transition to happen. And so there we go, that's the end of the highlighting and shading for the cloak. So super simple, because I didn't actually do any base coating. So I used the black prime as the deepest part of the shadow, and then just dry brush straight over that. And by gradually getting lighter and lighter, it built up all of those highlights a little bit. I then just kind of stippled some earth brown paint on just around the bottom edges, just to make it look a little more spattery and a little more fresh or recent, I suppose, just so that you then kind of get the effect that there is some mud spatter around the edges, and then just that build up of dirt and grime and dust and stuff that's extending up the cloaks. So like I was talking earlier about that painting experience where you go in with a plan for a certain level of effort and quality, and then as everything's then coming together, you just get driven to do more and more just because of how much you're loving how it was looking. That mud effect there completely came from that. I had no intention of doing that back at the start, but just because of how much I was loving how this guy was coming together, I wanted to do that mud effect there because I thought it would just look really cool, and the extra time spent doing that was totally worth it, because I think the overall effect that you get from it, how it helps bring that vibe, for lack of a better term, of these guys out, just really paid off. I'm super happy with how that ended up looking. Alright, so here I'm starting to work on this kick-ass axe, and the look that I wanted to go for here was that it's clearly made of metal, but that it's really beaten and old now, and that it's been through quite a few battles, and that it's not as smooth or shiny as it used to be. So I'm just using gunmetal from Vallejo and my dry brush, and I'm effectively just stippling the paint on. And by doing that kind of stipple sort of effect, it's covering most of the surface, so you get that metallic look, but it allows inconsistently some of the black from the prime to still show through. And then that gives that rough kind of finish to it. And now I'm just picking out some of the raised edges in this bronze colour. This is because I figure, being the church giant, an axe from the church would have a little bit of embellishment on it, but it also just helps to pick out some little different details just to break up that metallic colour. And now just throwing the black wash over the top. This is just to knock off most of that shine, but it will still keep that metallic look to it. And then just while the wash was drying, I then went in to work a little bit more on this mud spatter effect. I mentioned this earlier, just using this really old brush with these flared out bristles and just this earth brown paint, just stabbing it in there just to get a bit of a spattery sort of look. Now, what I'm going to do with the axe next is to start to build a rust effect and then lots of blood spatter. Now, this is one of the things, like I was talking about earlier in the video, where, you know, you go in with a bit of a plan, you know what textures you're going to build, what level of effort and quality you're going for, but then just because of how much you're loving how the mini is looking, you then start to do more things that you weren't necessarily planning on doing. And this is one of those things. I wasn't planning on doing this rust effect on the axe. This was just something that I wanted to add in just because of how much I was loving how the church giant was looking. So I just used my typhus corrosion there just to build up a bit of texture. So I just laid it down where I want the rust to be its thickest, and then just feathered out the edge so that it looks like the rust is spreading, but that it hasn't spread to the whole surface of the axe yet. Then I threw that rust wash over the top just to tint everything up that kind of orangey browny sort of colour. And now just using the riser rust to really get in some thick looking rust. But again, this isn't going to cover the whole surface of the axe. So I just laid it down where I want the rust to look as though it's at its thickest, the point where it started, and then feathering the edge out away from where I want the rust to be its thickest, just so that it looks like the rust started close to that central shaft sort of part, and now it's spreading out towards the blade, but it hasn't quite gotten there yet. And then, as you can see, I then did a second layer of that as well, just to really boost that rust color right in the middle there, just to, yeah, give the impression that the rust is spreading. And then the next thing that I wanted to do was to create a really cool blood spatter effect on the axe, but I just didn't want to have it on the surface of the axe. I wanted to try and have some dripping blood as well. So I looked up a couple of videos on how to do this, and a few of them used melted acrylic rods. I don't have access to any of them. I don't have any, couldn't find anywhere to buy them, so I had to find a different solution. And so you can see I just cut a little slither off the packaging of my green stuff. And I use this because it has just enough stiffness to it that it will hold its shape, but also soft enough so that I could actually cut it. Then I just super glued it down onto that bottom corner because that's the lowest part of the axe, so I figured that's where all of the blood would be running down to. And then just using blood for the blood god, now just painting over the top of it, and then just covering the rest of the surface of the axe with a blood spatter effect. So nice and thick down on the blade of the axe, but then up away from that a little bit, just a couple of spatters and a couple of lines just to sort of show that the blood might have sort of flung across that as well. and then because I figure these guys are wielding this massive axe, doing heaps of damage to enemies, they're probably going to cop a bit of that blood spatter onto them themselves. So you can see I've just gotten a bit of blood for the blood god on my dry brush there, and then just blowing through a straw, it's then just spraying that spatter across, and I kept it onto the right hand side of the church giant, the same side as the axe, just because I figured that's where most of that blood spatter will have gone. So yeah, I kind of had to work out this little way of doing that dripping blood myself, but I think the effect is really cool, and I'm really happy with how that ended up looking. And with just the base to paint black, our church giant is finished. So thank you very much for checking out another one of my videos. I absolutely loved painting these guys, and I really hope you enjoyed the video too. Please consider giving it a thumbs up if you did. But that's going to do us for today. So until next time, this is Matt from the Plastic Canvas signing out. Happy painting, everyone. Cheers.